Episode 96 of the Fired Coaches podcast. We have Coach Darren Savino on, who is the associate head coach with UCLA men's basketball. He's been in the Division I game for 30 years now, been in a few different stops along the way, but has spent quite a few years recently at Cincinnati and UCLA. And obviously we'll get into kind of his background, how he got all started and the travels he made along the way. So Coach Savino, I can't appreciate you taking some time here to sit down and chat.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Marcus, and hopefully some of my message today could help a younger coach through some ups and downs in our business and kind of get a view of what you could do to kind of get back on track.
100%. Going back to your early years, playing for Bob Hurley Sr. at St. Anthony, is that kind of where the coaching bug and, if you can go back in time and kind of look, is that how things kind of developed from a playing career? Obviously, you played the Division III level as well, too, and you guys had some real success there. But, where did that coaching bug initially start for you?
Yeah, I would say definitely Coach Hurley. I lived in literally on the same block as Coach Hurley, so I grew up with, his sons, Bobby and Dan Hurley. And so we were best friends. We were little kids, and I was, fortunate to go on some St. Anthony's practices when I was, a young kid, and got to see, him in action before I actually went to high school there. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. But obviously, I wasn't as good of a player as Bobby and Danny were. But I think my love for the game, love for sports, love for coaching, definitely was impacted by him. And, I never knew college coaching was going to be in my, my future. I thought I was going to probably be a high school coach and a teacher. But, my path took me this way, and here I am. But Coach Hurley is definitely a pillar of everything I do as a coach and why I want to coach.
Obviously well documented, especially the last few years with Dan at, UConn and things like that. But going back and, when St. Anthony was on the verge of closing many a times and the fundraising efforts and the YouTube videos and all the different types of stuff that's been out there. But do you think from playing for Coach Hurley, like mentally just kind of going through it, obviously having a lot of success, but just, him as a coach, do you feel like whatever was thrown your way in the game of basketball, that mentally you're like, hey, high school was this tough. Like I can get through pretty much anything.
Well, I think it's the environment that we were in too, the kind of where we grew up, and we didn't have our own gym. We would have to use other local, grammar school gyms, and all of our home games were at another high school, and so we always had that chip on our shoulder kind of mentality. And I think if you come from Jersey City, you have that chip on your shoulder anyway, and so. But he definitely pushed that envelope with the team and was a great motivator, and we were hungry, we were fighters, and so like that mentality as a coach, I've taken that with me because that's who I am, that's my personality, and I love to coach guys that are hungry and fiery and have a lot to prove. So I would say Coach Hurley, and being from Jersey City, definitely it kind of instilled that in myself.
Yeah, speaking of Jersey City, so Jersey City State is where you played at. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think junior year, 91-92, you guys end up in the Final Four. I think you lost in the consolation game to UW Platteville, coached by Bo Ryan. Just kind of talk about that experience of, I played Division III, coached Division III a long time. So just having kind of those foundational roots of Division III, playing for the love of it, and obviously, having a great career and you guys having a lot of success there.
Yeah, I think, what it taught me is, if you really love something, no matter who's watching or where the venue is, you just do it for the love of the game. And I love playing. People that have played Division III, you know what I'm talking about, Marcus. You're not getting paid. You're not on scholarship. The media barely covers it. Nobody kind of really, cares outside of your own little basketball community on campus and family and friends. So, I think you do it because you love the game. And I had a great experience doing it. Anywhere I go as a coach, I've been, played Division III. I don't care if I'm at the lowest level, Division I, or it doesn't matter who's at the game. I'm kind of used to that. So, all the bells and whistles of Division I basketball, it's nice. Don't get me wrong, but that's not why we got into coaching. We got into coaching because we love the game.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny. I see a lot of, former Division I athletes that were obviously very prolific, and, they're making the comparisons now with the NIL money. And, what they could and couldn't do. And it's like, me as a Division III player, I probably should have paid more money to play because I was not very good, but, had that opportunity to play, which was very lucky. Talk about your early days. I've had guests on here talk, from the 90s and 2000s and things like that, when the camp scene was obviously a lot bigger in terms of getting into college coaching and just high school coaching and being around and making those connections with people, seeing people actually be able to do their craft and just making that real genuine connection. Not to say that doesn't happen anymore, but just how big the camp scene was. And that was kind of the thing. Talk about, some of the camps that you worked back in the day and just how you made connections and kind of got around the scene to kind of network that way.
Yeah, it's definitely different. That you don't see, and as far as recruiting, there's not the old 5-star camps and Eastern Invitational. Those kind of days are over, and that was a great teaching, learning ground for young coaches, because I worked those camps. You build relationships at those camps. You learn how to coach at those camps. You learn how to deal with all kinds of kids from all different types of backgrounds and areas and out of state, and it's just so much you learn from interacting with that whole setup with a actual camp. And unfortunately for young coaches today, they don't have that as much. But any opportunity that a young coach currently can go do that, they should do it. I mean, I have great friends from 30 years ago, 35 years ago that I still am friends with from when I worked camp with them, and the bonds that we made back then. So it's definitely a different, different time. But what I would say is this: if you're not out there networking, meeting people, today's day and age, you have to know the agents on top of the AAU coaches and the high school coaches. To get into our business at this level, at the Division I level, you have to have some kind of feel of where the players are, who and your connection to players. And that's what got me into the door as a college coach. I coached at Marist High School for a couple of years, and we had a lot of Division I players on that team, and also my connection with St. Anthony's and some of the players there, my interactions with all these kids working camps. So you become, as a young coach, you become attractive in some degree, because you do have your ears on the ground and your connection to players. And so that's kind of the way I got into it and into college and got my foot in the door.
So you talked about coaching high school before you became an administrative assistant at Seton Hall, kind of your first year in college basketball. You talked about obviously being able to build those connections, and obviously you had, you were coaching high level players. You came from St. Anthony, as you mentioned. Do you think it was a byproduct of obviously that, or like you were mentioning, do you think that you were savvy enough and understanding like, hey, the connections, this is going to be the way that I'm actually going to make myself, not to discount what you've done, right, as a player, as a coach and things like that, but do you think just kind of being able to, connect A, B, C, and D together was a way that you were going to be able to navigate the way and get into the coaching waters at the college level as well too?
I wish I was that smart, Marcus. I had no idea what I was doing. There was no plan. I can't lie. I didn't think, well, if I get close to these guys, I can make myself into a Division I assistant. I just don't think that way. And to be honest with you, I still don't think that way. I just love being around the game and love coaching. And I think if you have that mindset, at least the way I do it and the way I think is, if you have that mindset, all these things may come, and it opens up doors for you. And I didn't even know, again, like I said before, what I was doing. But I was around, I was there, I was present, I was working, I was, again, going to camps, I was doing this, I was doing that. And, as time goes on, people see that, and they see you out there, and they know that you're connected and you work, and then the doors just open up for you. But again, there was no plan for that. I just kind of was really gullible and young and didn't know what I was doing.
Well, obviously willing to work, right, which is the biggest thing. That 95-96 season when you get to Seton Hall, we've had guests on here before too, which I never really thought about it. But in some ways, you being an administrative guy, looking back now, do you think that was really foundational for you? Because again, I think like, you tell a lot of coaches like, hey, if you can get an in, but some people are like, hey, I want to get on the floor. I want to be able to recruit. Being an administrative guy, it's like, I don't know about that. But, being an administrative guy, did that give you a really great perspective of everything that was going on in that program? As opposed to, hey, you're on the floor, you're coaching and recruiting, you're obviously understanding everything, but you're also siloed into what your role is, where administratively, you're kind of seeing the whole deal. Like, do you think that helped you early on?
100%. All the things that we did 30 years ago has helped me understand how college basketball works. I mean, from academics to recruiting to compliance. We had film exchange back then where, there was no computers and electronically getting games sent to your computer. So there was so many things. Camp back then was really big. I was involved in running camps and organizing camps. So I pretty much did and wore every hat possible in my administrative role. And then obviously after that as a young assistant. But what I would say is I was not good at it. I did not want to be an administrator. I was probably the worst administrative assistant in the country because I didn't want to order the food. I didn't want to do those administrative things. I was young and I wanted to be on the court as a coach. So it was a tough year for me because I couldn't scout, I couldn't coach. But like you said, I just learned, I didn't know what I was doing. So I just learned how Division I basketball operates. And that year for me was invaluable for sure.
Well, it's a good thing that social media wasn't around. We didn't have any power rankings of the admin assistants at that time because it doesn't sound like you'd be very high there.
No.
But the next year, right, if I'm not mistaken, after that 1 year, 96, 97, you get into St. John's and working for Fran Fraschilla there as an assistant. So kind of talk about, that transition from Seton Hall to St. John's.
Yeah. So Fran was Fran Fraschilla and Brian Cousins was Fran's assistant at Manhattan. They were friends of our program at Marist High School. They were great recruiters. They would show up, build relationships, and they knew we had players. They had one of our former high school players at Marist. It was their starting center at Manhattan. So there was a relationship with the program, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying to meet people, and myself and Fran and Brian Cousins developed a relationship, and I don't know if you have time for a longer story, but I could tell you a quick story about
for
this.
Sure.
So
absolutely.
At the time, Fran would always joke with me and be like, "Hey, Darren, he'd come over, talk, and he goes, someday I'm going to hire you." This is when I was coaching in high school as an assistant. And I'm like, "Yeah, right, great." I didn't think anything of it, but I do remember him saying that. And so when I go to Seton Hall, okay, I talked to Brian Cousins a few times. He was his assistant. We stayed in touch. After the year's over, Fran gets the St. John's job. Okay. And again, I think it's before the internet. I don't really remember the internet in 95 or 94, but if we had it, I didn't have it. So you listen to the radio or sports talk and you see that he gets a job. So there's no cell phone. So I have Fran Fraschilla's home number in White Plains and I call the house. His wife answers. Fran's not home. "Hey, Darren, take your number." And I just called him. Again, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have an agent. There's nobody to tell me what to do.
There's no playbook, right?
Randomly.
Yeah, just call.
Correct. And Fran does call me back. We chop it up for a while, and then I was like, "Coach, I'm just calling you because you said when you get a job, you're going to hire me, and here I am." And we talked about it, and I was one of the guys he was going to consider hiring, and it was down to me and one other guy. And I'm driving down the Jersey Shore to see my parents. And on WFAN, which is Sports Talk Radio, there's this bulletin that John Calipari is taking the Nets job and leaving University of Massachusetts. Well, one of his assistants was up for the job that I was trying to get. And Fran gave him the job already. So I kind of skipped a step, but he got the job already. So I was out. But I heard when Calipari was leaving UMass, and for some reason that Bruiser Flint became the head coach, he was his assistant. For some reason, I just thought, let me call Brian Cousins back up. Maybe this has something to do with me. Maybe that guy doesn't want to go to St. John's and go back to UMass. So sure enough, I called Brian Cousins. He said, we're back on. You got a chance here. The guy left. He went back to UMass. We got an open spot. And Fran called me the next day and was like, "Hey, I told you I wanted to hire you. I had to do this other thing first. You were the second guy. And get your butt in Queens." So that's a long story, but
no, and
it probably doesn't happen.
It's a great story because again, you're not talking about using the landline, but you're literally talking about driving and hearing on the radio of "Hey, he's taking this job. I can put I'm back in the mix." Yes. Maybe that's just
correct.
And again, right, you tell so many, and not to be that guy, right? We tell so many young kids nowadays, and they're like, "Okay, cool, whatever." But that's actually a crazy story, just in how back in the day, it's there's no message board, there's no scuttlebutt, there's no social, it's literally the radio and landlines. That's what we're dealing with here.
Well, I think too, it also teaches you, Marcus, that how you interact with people and the relationships you build and how you make people feel in those relationships will always come back to you in a positive way. And for whatever reason, I'm not that gullible. I know that I had connections with players and that was part of it. It's okay. But there's other people that have connection with players. And we just struck a chord with each other. We built a genuine relationship. They thought I was a hard worker, or they liked me. But again, you never know when you're interacting with people how things are going to turn out. So I guess the lesson here is try to be a good guy. Try to build real relationships, instead of phony surface kind of relationships with people. And eventually those type of things can help you in the long run.
Well, again, how easy would it have been for you to be, hey, you told me you were going to hire me. Now you're going with this other guy, right? Just cut a bridge and, right? Like there's just so many ways.
Get mad.
How does that change your career, right? You never know, right? So, no, it's a great learning lesson there. And, so you're there from 96 to 98. Fran was let go after that. What was kind of that experience of going through that for the first time and, just being like, hey, I'm in college basketball here. I'm an assistant. I'm obviously at a great program, and now things have kind of come to a halt.
Marcus, young people will not understand I'm in a small apartment in Jamaica, Queens, like a 1-bedroom studio by myself and no cell phone. And I don't know what's going on. Like once you leave the office and you're not there with the other guys on the staff and this happens, like I don't have an agent. There's nobody to talk to. I don't know what to do. And I just put 2 and 2 together and started to call some people that I did know. Ron Rutledge, who was on the staff with us at St. John's, I went in the next day essentially and asked him, like, hey, what do I do? Like, how can you help me? I don't know what to do. And, he made some phone calls with me and I got connected with Joe Dooley, who is a Jersey guy, and he was the head coach at East Carolina, and he had one of his bottom positions open that literally paid probably $16,000. But we talked, we met somewhere, and
so there's a mutual connection here, right? Opportunity to stay in it. Yep.
Correct. And I didn't really know Joe. I knew who he was because Joe was a good player. He had a name. He was from New Jersey. He's older than me, but he was like, yeah, this guy's from St. John's. He was an assistant for Fran. $16,000. Come on down. And so I load up a U-Haul truck of whatever crap that I had and headed down to Greenville, North Carolina, which you can tell by my accent, it's gotten better over time, but I was a fish out of water down in Greenville, North Carolina, but it's what I had to do. And again, I didn't know what I was doing. I was sleeping on a crappy bed and eating ramen noodles with string cheese on top. Those were my dinners and just grinded it out. But that was my next move. And again, I got the job because of, help. I needed help. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. A personal kind of, I guess, pet peeve of mine has always been, where they talk about coaches and what they make for money and things like that. And it's also like, I struggle because people never have or usually, I shouldn't say never, but don't typically have that perspective of like, hey, here's what you're doing to stay in it, right? Like, it's not always glitz and glamour, right? Like, what were people doing years ago to get their foot in the door and all the stuff that they've done? I said, there's a great podcast that's out there for, your first few years in coaching when you're sleeping on a crappy bed and you're eating ramen every night and you're just like, hey, I'm just trying to stay involved and, do the best job I can. So, those first few years, again, between St. John's, East Carolina, you get back with Fran at New Mexico as well, too. And, things all kind of end there within a short time. Going through that, I know obviously it's not easy, but is there any point where you become like, hey, I've already been through this once, like I'm just going to keep swinging, like where you just feel like you can just keep going and it's not really going to matter what happens to you just because you've already had these things happen?
It's still, yeah, I think there's some truth to that for me, but it's still hard. You're getting knocked down constantly and you got to be able to pick yourself up and keep moving. And, the good thing for me is at the time I didn't have any children and money for me, the fact that I was making money was great. So I didn't care how much money I was making and I had no ego when it came to where do I have to go next? Who wants to hire me? I can coach? Okay, great. I'm coming. And that's kind of how I kept picking myself up off the mat. And, You go from St. John's, Seton Hall, St. John's to East Carolina, and then you go to New Mexico, which is a pretty good job and a great basketball town, and then you go to Quinnipiac for 2 years. I never even heard of it before I got involved with the job. So, and I didn't care. I was like, this guy wants to hire me. I know of Joe DeSantis. I can get back home on the East Coast. Let's do it. I don't care about I care about the money, but I didn't care about the money. It wasn't about the money. It was the opportunity to continue to coach, to continue to learn, to continue to improve, continue to network, all these things. And that was at this point, I was all in. So you would have to hit me in the head with a shovel to get me to stop, going for the next job.
Well, and again, looking back, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but how great was that for your career, developing relationships in different areas as well, too, right? Like you're talking East Carolina, New Mexico, you're back east. I mean, how much did that just strengthen, obviously, just general relationships, but recruiting and all that for contacts and whatnot moving forward?
Experience is a great thing. Sometimes in today's age, we shy away from the older guy for some reason, but in all aspects of life. And I think the more time you start putting in, the more years you're putting in, like you said, the locations here in North Carolina and New York and New Mexico, and you start bopping around here and moving around, you start to develop more relationships, and it just becomes, a little bit more attractive as an assistant, because now you can sell yourself that you can do different things, that you have experiences in different parts of the country, and it definitely it helps you build your brand as a coach.
You talked about Quinnipiac, and I believe it was at the end of that 04 season, you joined Coach Cronin's staff at Murray State, and that's where you guys originally started working together. Now, you had a relationship prior to that, but just kind of talk about how that all kind of evolved, because obviously, you guys worked together, then there was a stint where you weren't together and came back together, but obviously been together a long time. So, where did that all kind of start and kind of blossom for you guys?
Yeah. So it was after the season, my second year at Quinnipiac. And if people who know basketball would know the Pump brothers, David and Dana Pump, if people that have been around the game for a long time, they have been. They were a connector of people. They were networkers. They ran camps. They did all kind of AAU program.
Had a Final Four party, right? There's all different.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep.
All of it. And I was very close to David Pump, and so was Mick Cronin. And so we were able to he called me up and said, "Hey, would you go to Murray State with Mick Cronin?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would." And he connected us. I called Mick. He must have called Mick and said, "Hey, Darren's interested," and we talked. And David Pump got me the job by just reaching out to me because his friend is Mick. Mick needs an assistant. You'd be great. And I loved it because Mick was hiring me because he liked me, because we did have some social interactions, and we kind of knew each other growing up in the game. But he didn't hire me for recruiting, because there wasn't many New York City area kids going to go to Murray, Kentucky. And so, but I had experience now as a coach, as a recruiter in different spots. And, he thought I would be a great addition to his staff. So, I mean, it changed my life really, as far as, in coaching, because I worked with Mick now for 18 years. So if my relationship with David Pump we didn't have a relationship, I would have never gotten that job with Mick at Murray State.
Well, in the 2 years you're there, I mean, I think you guys won 2 OVC titles. You made the NCAA tournament in 06. I mean, just talk about in that short time frame, again, you're talking obviously blossoming that relationship there, but just the success you guys had and, for yourself, right? Like obviously going through, like we had kind of documented just the different steps where you're like, I'm just staying in it. It doesn't matter where I go, to now it's like, hey, we're hitting some true success here. This is awesome.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Mick, immediately, we're the same age. And once I was there and watched him coach and practice on stuff, I immediately said, this guy's really good. Like, my perception of Mick was he was at Cincinnati and then he was at Louisville, but he had the perception of a recruiter, that he was young, he was aggressive, he was very close to Sonny Vaccaro. He was an up and coming assistant because he was recruiting. And I didn't know how good of a coach he was until I got there and then realized, well, he's a recruiter, but he's more of a coach than he is a recruiter. This guy's a real coach. So, instantly I knew we were going to do well there. first of all, Murray State's a great basketball program. It's a smaller level, but they love the people in that area in Kentucky. They love the Racers. And that's a big-time mid-major program. So we were able to get good players, JUCO players, transfers, and we had a loaded team in our second year. And, we had great success. And then Mick, with his reputation and his name and his pedigree working for Bob Huggins and Rick Pitino, when the Cincinnati job came open, they instantly gobbled him up. So we were headed to the Queen City.
Yeah. So, he gets that Cincinnati job, and you originally didn't go with, and I believe I read an article that it may have been getting closer to family, where you decided to go work at Rutgers, and so kind of talk about, that move to get back east, be around some family and go work at Rutgers and I believe the Big East at that point.
Yeah. So at the time, my mom did have some health issues, and I went with Mick for like 2 or 3 weeks to Cincinnati. I stayed at Murray for a week or two. I tried to get the head coaching job. I didn't get it. Went up there with Mick, and I was at Cincinnati for 2 or 3 weeks. I was recruiting. I was doing everything. And until, I got contacted by somebody that knows Fred Hill, who was the head coach at Rutgers. He was a new head coach. Asked me if I'd be interested. And I was like, gosh, I don't know if I am, because I'm with Mick. He took me to Cincinnati. We're going to be good. It's a great job. There's a lot of potential with this. But thinking about it more, I got a chance to think that I could go back and be close to my parents, close to my mom who was sick. And it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made in this profession, because I had to go now and talk to Mick and tell him, thank you, but I'm going to go back home after 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And him being the head coach now at Cincinnati in the era of no transfer portal, and there was nobody on the team except like one guy. I mean, he was up against it. We were up against it. And we were working 24/7. I mean, you can imagine back then how difficult it was to put a team together in April with no transfer portal. So he handled it with such class. When I met with him, he understood 100%. And it just was like a total relief for me, because I didn't want to leave, but I knew that this was the right move for myself and my family. And it was one of the best things I ever did, even though we didn't have great success at Rutgers in 4 years. Fred Hill got fired, but it was the best 4 years of my life, because I got a chance to spend a lot of time with my mom and my dad.
It's very, again, right, we had a phone call the other night and talking to you now, but, just so admirable, because I think like what comes through on so many of these, right, like doesn't matter the level, but obviously there is different things when you're at the Division I level, because the travel usually means it's a little bit further away and it's more happening than when you're at a Division III and you're a little bit more regional, to be able to do that, right? Because again, like you said, that's a tough point in your career where things are going really well. Like you said with Mick, you're going to build a lot of, continuity with him going to Cincinnati or back to Cincinnati for him, and you going there, and, to be able to do that. I think that there's just those years that, right, like life's frail, and we don't always get those opportunities. So when something like that happens, you take advantage of it when you can. But again, I understand, career-wise, things get tough that way too. So, again, like you mentioned, Coach Hill gets let go, and was that pretty much a seamless transition then of finding a spot to get back to Cincinnati then with Coach Cronin after, or was it kind of a little bit of chaotic with, spots and where you'd be able to find that next gig?
It was chaotic. It was stressful. Now I'm older. I have a condo that I bought that I wasn't renting anymore. My first actual property that I owned, and it was kind of late when it happened. And I tried to get involved with every job. You name it. I was doing interviews in person, on the phone. Mick, actually, I stayed in touch with Mick when I was at Rutgers, and we still were friends. And we did talk. And when this happened, he was on the phone right away, calling this guy, hire Darren. Trust me, hire Darren, hire. And he did everything he could. And, I at the end of it, I had one job at a lower level that I could take. And prior to that, Marcus, I was out for at least a month or two, probably 2 months, not knowing what I was going to do. So I wasn't in the office anymore. And I didn't want to stay in my condo. So I would get up early, go to LA Fitness, work out, go from LA Fitness to my new office, which was Panera Bread.
Get into a routine
every day for 3 hours, 3.5 hours. I would go in the corner. This one Panera Bread was perfect. Wasn't that crowded. I could plug my computer in, plug my phone in, make phone calls. I had to-do lists. I had people I was calling. I was trying to organize my life to figure out, who do I need to call and how can I get back in and is there an opening somewhere? Do I know somebody? And so I did that for at least a month, Monday through Friday, just to get out of my house and do it. And it forced me to really focus in on the job search. And
like you're going somewhere, right? Like you're going to work as opposed to just sitting there and being like, right? Like, oh my gosh,
sit in your house,
feeling down and like, how do I get going here? Right. Where you go somewhere like you're actually going to work. So I love that.
And when I left to go home, I was there, some days, maybe 2 hours, some days 3, whatever. And when I would leave and go home, I felt like I accomplished something. Even though maybe I didn't get a job that day, I felt like I put in good work and I felt like I was doing something again, instead of sitting home doing nothing and pouting and feeling negative about my situation. That was really uplifting to go do that. It made me feel much better.
Was there any positive things that came out of that time? Again, we talked obviously earlier in your career, you go through that and you're just kind of going. Where now it's like, okay, yeah, like you said, you're getting a little bit older in your career here. You're let go. It's 2 or 3 months. Was there anything positive that, looking back now, like that came out of that where you're like, actually, that was a really important point, for reflection or whatever, by going through that point?
I think the biggest thing, forget about the X's and O's and what you should do and shouldn't do as a head coach. You learn from mistakes, all those things. My own personal career, my own personal, future. I realized that if you don't build, and I kind of knew this, but that really put the pressure on me to realize if you don't build real relationships with people and do a great job of networking and building trust with other people, like you're not going to do it on your own, not in this business. Unless you played in the NBA and you had this fame, you're famous on your name and what you did in your career. Most of us didn't do that. And so you're going to get back in, you're going to get the next job, you're going to get the promotion or whatever it is by your value, what your connections, your relationships with people. Like that's how you're going to get the next opportunity. And I really was like, I needed help big time. Again, I had a condo that I had to pay my mortgage on. I wasn't 23 years old, 24 years old anymore. I had to figure it out. And, thank God that we'll get to the story here, but my relationships, the people, the networking, that's how I got another job. And it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't really conscious of that.
No, I love that. And I think that, I try to, try to give back to some Division III coaches who are kind of getting into it. And I always say like, get to know 50 people really well. Where like, their significant others, right? Like, where they're from, where they played. And it's not just this, right? Like, oh my gosh, I need a job, right? Like you need to get to know people really well and prove it over and over and over and be that connector, right? Because if you do that and you're sincere about it, it's going to come back to you tenfold, regardless of what your situation is. So how did it end up that you ended up getting to Cincinnati then?
So I was taking a low major Division I assistant job after Rutgers. That's the only thing I could get at that time. My plan was to start August 1st. I was going to use the month of July, not get paid, not work, and just kind of be a free agent and go to camps and go to tournaments and go watch players. Back then, the NCAA rules were really strict. You can't speak to players, you can't speak to families, you couldn't even speak to the AAU coaches.
Like the separated bleachers type deal at events and all that stuff, yeah.
It was really strict. So here I don't have a job, so I can go to the event and talk to all the AAU coaches, talk to high school coaches, talk to work camps. I worked camps. I watched and talked to players. I built relationships. So when I would start work in August, I had a head start. I had relationships. I had players. I had lists. I was out there, and it definitely helped my transition. But so when right before July started, one of Mick's assistants at Cincinnati left to go to Oregon, and he called me up and said, "Hey, my guy's leaving. He's going to Oregon. Would you come back?" And I knew I did my time at Rutgers, and my time at home was awesome, and I was without hesitation, yes. When do you want me to start? And then we talked a little bit on the phone, and we kept the same game plan. We'll wait until August. You do what you got to do in July and run around, and then we'll get you out. We'll get you out in August once July's over. So that was it.
I love that story again, just that persistence of where, and you had a plan, right? Like, and I think like had things not worked out where, let's say Cincinnati, that guy never leaves and ends up going to Oregon. Like, to me, it's like you succeeded in that you found like, I'm going to do the next best thing here, right? To like keep going. And it's not that moment of like, well, here we go. Like, I'll just wait for somebody, right? Not that you're going to do that, but I think there's so many times where we feel like maybe we've exhausted all options. And for you, it was like, hey, I'm going to Panera. I got a regular day job I'm basically going to here, calling people and working on a to-do list. And then summer scene, here's what I'm going to do. And so I think that's a great nugget. And I think there's, again, I've had coaches reach out on DM on here before that I've never met before, whether they're a JUCO coach or whatever, and they get let go for the first time and they're like, your podcast has helped me. And I think like that's a great tool is like, hey, just keep going. Like, just keep reinventing yourself. Or going back to the roots, like you said, like I'm going back to work camps. I'm just, whatever way I can continue to network, build my craft, like that's just what you got to do, right? I mean, that's just, you got to exhaust all options.
Can't stop. And you can't be afraid to take a step down, so to speak, where a level, maybe it's not the same level, maybe the money's not the same. I think it's easier in college, in Division I, in my opinion, it's easier to get a job if you have a job. Being out of the profession for a year, I mean, people have gotten back in and you can't do that. But as an assistant coach, it's different. You're a head coach and you're at the highest level. You take a year or two off.
Do some TV stuff or whatever, right? Like, yeah.
Correct. Assistant coaches can't do that, in my opinion. You got to stay. And even if it's not the job you want and you don't think it's a great job, it's a job. You're working. Again, you're making connections. You're making contacts. You're building relationships. You're gaining experience, whatever experience that is. And in my opinion, that'll help you get the next job, as opposed to a guy that sits out and it doesn't, isn't able to get another job. It's harder to get back in once you leave.
Well, and now it's like, you're going on basically 16 years between Cincinnati and UCLA with Coach Cronin. Go from, earlier in your career to where, again, like you're not wanting to leave these jobs, right? Things are happening and you got to go find the next stop, to having the consistency, which again is, as you know better than anybody, a rarity in today's game, to where you've been fortunate to be 16 years between two strong institutions. I mean, what is like that, polar opposite been for your career, where it's like, hey, I know where I'm going to work. I know how we're going to get better. We're building off of this. Just the continuity of whether it's staff or team or institutions that you've been at.
You get spoiled. It's such a beautiful thing just to be in one place for a certain amount of time, and the comfort level. It's just, it's like anything in life, right? You work somewhere for a long time. You get the ins and outs, the good and the bad. You know it all. And I got really comfortable and enjoyed my time at Cincinnati. We had things going in the way we wanted them to go. We had a program, we had a culture. It was rolling to the way we wanted it to roll it. And when we left to come to UCLA is a hard job to turn down, of course. And it took a year or two. And once we got that going, we got our comfort level, we got our culture, and it feels great to be in one place for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, we always finish up here with ways that you can continue to get better. And sometimes we've talked with people. It's just staying connected to other coaches, seeing what's going on. Obviously, on the internet, there's so many things nowadays. But is there anything that you do, just on a yearly basis, whether it's summer or whenever you get some time to kind of reflect or just learn of a craft or something that you can do better or build upon?
Yeah, I'm constantly, today's technology is just amazing. What the young coaches are able to kind of learn so fast because of technology. It's amazing. Outside of the obvious, watching film, studying, like I study Euro basketball, just watched two teams last night and looking at their offense and things that they do. And, again, we have the access to that on our computer. It's so quick. And so those things are there for all coaches to constantly learn and improve. Watch film, watch the current trends, what people are doing defensively, offensively. I'm always doing that, But my recommendation to young coaches is you can't be good at anything in life, whether you're a coach or you're a business person or a realtor or a doctor or whatever it is, if you're not developing yourself before anything else. And so when I say that, read as much as possible. And it could be anything from coaching books to leadership books to self-development books, constantly reading and learning and making yourself the best that you can be. And over the last 15 years, I think I wish I would have started a lot earlier in my life. Reading is so important for your personal development. And I think that it just makes you more confident in what you do every day. It's made me a better coach. It's made me a better leader. It's made me a better mentor, and it's made me a better friend. I'm just so much more conscious of things than I was 25 years ago because obviously experience, but I really think reading and learning has really helped me. And I just, again, we have young guys on our staff. I constantly are teaching them and trying to give them knowledge and talk about reading and learning and watching film and podcasts. So constantly learning is something that I think is really important.
No, I love that about the reading because it's one of those things where I really enjoy reading now. And, 21-year-old myself, 18, 19 years ago would have been like, you don't like reading. Like, what are you doing? But it's just so calming. And maybe it's because we're on our phones and we just have so much technology nowadays that this is like something different, right? Where it's, like you said, reading is so powerful and great for your development, but it's almost like a calming, relaxing type thing too, where it's just away from technology. Well, speaking of technology, obviously if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be on here. So I sincerely appreciate you taking time to sit down, really tell your story, dive in, and just really can't appreciate enough. And obviously wish you guys the best of continued success here at UCLA.
I really appreciate it, Marcus, and hopefully, some of the young coaches that were listening today can get something out of it, and it helps them in their career path as well.